Okay, this screencast is going to cover a large portion of our chapter 23 notes, so let's make sure we have those outlines opened. I wanted to start by just kind of reviewing a little bit. When we last left off with discussing the kind of origins of the Great Depression last week, we discussed that, there are many factors that go into the start of the Great Depression. Even though the stock market crash is kind of the large-scale event that will thrust the U.S. economy into a state of economic depression with the high unemployment and all the ripple effects that stem out of that. There were a lot of things going on and building to that event with the tariffs, with the farmers kind of in crisis, with the overuse of credit spending. In the same way that there are many factors, there are many effects once we enter the Great Depression. So today's lesson is in large part going to be talking about how so many people are affected in different ways and how, those people are also affected internationally. So we discussed, one immediate effect is that when the market kind of, bottoms out, then businesses kind of follow suit. Many of them, having to go out of business, thus laying off all their employees, which kind of created a ripple effect of both unemployment, but also businesses shutting down, and then the banks collapsing as well. But the thing I want to add on to that is over the years, like throughout the 30s, even though the Great Depression is very much an economic event that started and took root in the United States, Europe and Asia and our other foreign countries are going to also feel the effects of this economic depression. So it's not limited to the United States. Other countries will be affected and their economies will be affected as well. Because if we trade with, countries in Asia and countries in Europe, and our businesses are suffering, then they're also going to see a bit of a slope there. So we're going to look at kind of the effects of the depression within the United States by comparing and kind of looking at what's happening in the cities versus what's happening in the rural areas of America. Overall, there's just large-scale suffering, but depending on where you lived, your losses might have looked a little bit differently. So because the cities, are a home to many jobs, the number one issue felt in the cities is going to be unemployment. As many people find themselves out of work very quickly with businesses, banks, etc. shutting down. Unemployment eventually leads to large bouts of homelessness. We do see these communities develop right on the outskirts of the city limits called Shanty Towns, which are essentially little towns of like man-made like shacks and just kind of temporary shelter. Kind of looks, if you see this picture, you see these little scrap metal homes right outside of the city skyline. But people had nowhere to go. And so the cities do have large amounts of homelessness. There are some relief efforts, typically, implemented by charities like you're seeing on the top image. It was the sign's cut off, but it says free donuts and coffee for the unemployed. There are soup kitchens opening. But all of this, relief effort is mostly coming just from, local philanthropists, regional, businesses that were trying to offer help. Think about like some of the welfare agencies that were created out of the progressive era, like the Salvation Army. There isn't a lot of government relief yet, and we're going to kind of continue talking about that. In terms of the shanty towns, those are also commonly referred to as Hoovervilles, which is not a compliment. It's more or less the unemployment and homelessness being blamed on Hoover for his lack of response, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Also wanting to address, what's happening in the rural parts of the United States. Since this is our farming sector and we mentioned, the farmers were already in crisis, we know that farmers, are struggling with their harvests and their profits. And, when they are not unable to make their rent payments, they will also find themselves like being kicked off their land, having to foreclose on their land. But that's also their job, because their land is their job. Their land is not just where they live, but it's how they make their money. But there's another issue with rural America that's happening, especially in the Midwest, and that's something called the Dust Bowl. So let's kind of just touch on this. We don't need to understand necessarily the scientific realities of the Dust Bowl, but we want to understand that part of it is, naturally just a weather, meteorological, geographic disaster, and parts of it are kind of like human-made and human-enforced. Consider that with the overproduction that was taking place, causing that surplus existing in the 20s, that was really not great for the land. But on top of overproduction, there was also a huge drought in the early 30s in the Great Plains region. Okay. That then leads to, a kind of level of like dead topsoil. Is not enough grass or trees left to hold the soil down. And then when you get these sweeping winds coming off of the Great Plains, you're going to see, millions of tons of dust like picked up and carried across the Midwest. The regions that are the hardest hit because of the Dust Bowl are Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. You're going to see an effect here that hundreds of thousands of farmers, they're forced to flee. The dust was literally so thick, you couldn't stay, you couldn't work. It was bad to breathe. It was very troublesome. And so we see a lot of farmers just completely vacating their land and moving out west. This is actually just a side note, but this is how Route 66 becomes so well traveled, and such a well-known highway, because it was kind of this exodus route, for farmers like fleeing west. Wanting to talk about, the effects of the Depression on people. Obviously, a lot of Americans are going through hard times with unemployment and the unfortunate realities that stem from a lack of income. But what's interesting is that many families actually bonded, and felt a sense of unity during the Depression. It's kind of like that saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. It's just, people are forced to kind of hunker down together and make it through. So there's a sense of unity, kind of persevering through all the suffering. But people would would stay home and find different ways to entertain themselves. Board games became very popular, a very popular form of entertainment, maybe in you and your family, throughout the pandemic and throughout quarantine back in the spring. Had some family game nights just to find ways to entertain yourself. In some ways, though, the reality is that the Depression would break families apart. Men are psychologically programmed to be providers and to care, to take care of their family units, take care of their team. And with being off of work or out of work for so long, many men get severely depressed. And you do have many like leaving the home, just wandering as vagrants, like looking for jobs by kind of roaming from city to city. They just felt obliged to like leave to find work, which kind of left women, having to kind of hold down the fort and keep things together for their family. This is when women start managing very strict like budgets within the home. They start trying to preserve food by canning things and preserving, foods. If there was a job to find, a woman would often like venture off and try to find work. Sometimes employers would hire women because they would be paid less. So, and then in terms of children, it's just really sad because this is a really tough time for people to experience their years of youth when things are supposed to be kind of lighthearted and fun, and the burden and the weight shouldn't be felt by young children. But children really had poor diets, a lack of money for proper health care, so that led to a lot of serious health problems being felt by the youth of America. Schools were not a priority. People's priority was trying to make ends meet for survival purposes. And so you'd have young kids like staying out of school to instead like look for work opportunities for their families to help their families survive. And And additionally, we saw, teenagers kind of take a turn and try to grow up too quickly. Once you hit an age, 15 years old, maybe even a little bit younger, you started realizing like your chances were better if you just went and tried to make it on your own, and you would be less of a burden to your family as well. And I know that's kind of a dark thought. I'm not telling you all to like go get emancipated or anything, but it is true during this era that, teenagers realize very quickly they are physically capable of looking out for themselves. And so, I do know, however, that's obviously not a common opinion today. So again, not encouraging you to run off and try to make it on your own. Okay, also just kind of discussing some social effects of the, depression. You do see people delaying, not just like the youth, but like adults delaying their dreams of like college to pursue a career. We see people delaying getting married, kind of pushing off starting a family. It was just not the right time to, increase a family or start a family and try to raise them in hardship. Additionally, just want to add that this is kind of where that stigma of hoarding comes from, this idea of like not wanting to let go of anything or being super thrifty, never, wanting to stop saving things and resources that could be helpful. That's considered actually a psychological legacy of the Great Depression era. Okay, so let's just bring this back to Hoover for a second. Let's recall that, Hoover is the president at the time that this depression begins. And he does try to tell Americans that the economy is going to be okay, things are going to improve, it's just a natural kind of downturn, and that periods of economic growth typically follow any sort of like recession or depression. He believes that the government should foster cooperation between groups, between businesses, and overall the government should have a limited role in direct intervention, within the economy. He also believed in this term called rugged individualism, which was this idea that people should succeed through their own efforts and kind of take care of themselves and their families and not depend on like government handouts. So he was not in favor of any form of like direct relief initially. That was kind of what he went into this, term with. Not that he, was expecting or, surmising that the depression would happen, but his real philosophy is that this is all for the people to kind of figure out for themselves. But he does realize that if he wants to get reelected, he's going to have to attempt to take some steps. So in terms of his cautious steps, one large project that Hoover proposed was called the Boulder Dam. It was a massive dam on the Colorado River, and it would provide electricity, water, flood control to a lot of these western states like Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, etc. But the biggest thing, of course, is that a project this size provides jobs. Lots of labor jobs, lots of construction jobs. And because of that effort, today the Boulder Dam is more commonly known as the Hoover Dam. So I've never been, maybe you may have been with your family, but that's kind of, it comes out of the Depression era, and that's why it has that name, named after the president. Additionally, Hoover will sign something called the RFC, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, into law. This authorized up to $2 billion for emergency financing for banks, big business, railroads, insurance companies, kind of bailing out those big corporations. Hoover believed that this money would trickle down naturally. Like, we'd see higher wages, we'd see more employment if these large businesses had those resources. But critics said that the money would only help the corporations, and that the hungry couldn't wait for the money to trickle down. Like, this is going to take years. The people really are in need of direct relief. It's not a terrible idea. It's just not the right answer to this particular problem. And because of that, this cost Hoover a lot of popularity points, which brings us to his re-election year, 1932. As the incumbent, the Republicans do run Herbert Hoover. He is the Republican candidate. But the Democrats will run kind of up-and-comer Franklin Delano Roosevelt, distant cousin of Teddy Roosevelt, who was running on this kind of promise of more direct government intervention, which is not a hard sell in the worst economic depression in American history. So let's just say Roosevelt will run and win rather easily. He, before he's even inaugurated, forms a group called the Brain Trust, which kind of is his team of advisors that are made up of professors, lawyers, journalists, other, just professionals in their specialty. And they kind of work as a team to come up with this collective solution to alleviate the problems of the Great Depression. And their big master plan becomes known as the New Deal, which had 3 overall goals: relief, recovery, and reform. This is what's being proposed anyway. So it would be relief for the needy, like that's that direct relief that people are in need of automatically, economic recovery, and allowing the government to the economy to stabilize, and then reform to kind of prevent this from being able to happen again. And like I said, he wins easily. He kind of creates this plan, and when he takes over, he has something called the 100 days, which are his first 100 days in office, which are a period of like very intense, very rapid activity where like more than 15 pieces of legislation are signed into law to try to get things done and solve these problems. We'll talk about some of the specific agencies that were created. You don't really need to know about which ones were in the first 100 days or not. You just want to understand that he comes out swinging. And many of the relief, we're going to talk about some specific programs. Some of them were created immediately within, his first kind of quarter of his first year. He also gave something called Fireside Chats. These are radio talks that were given to the public, the American families, talking about just all of the issues happening surrounding the Depression and many of his plans in action within the New Deal. So the radio, y'all, is really like the most powerful form of communication at this point in history, especially in, American kind of industrial society. Most families had access to a radio, and this is how they get their news. This is also their source of entertainment, in the 30s. But for Roosevelt, he wants to be able to inform people of what's going on. They've been kept in the dark. They don't really even understand what happened with the stock market, or, what happened with the banks. He really explains the issues of the Depression as well as the programs that are aiming to alleviate those issues, kind of in a way that the average American could understand. Like, you didn't need to have a collegiate degree to understand what Roosevelt was telling you in these discussions. And, he's talking as if he's like just sharing, sitting in your living room, enjoying a drink and out enjoying the fireplace. And that's why they're called those fireside chats. So yeah, in his first fireside chat, he kind of explained like what happened with the banking crisis. Like, you want to know why the banks collapsed? It's because we all withdrew, and we need to be able to trust the banks. And I'm going to put programs in place that help us to trust the banks again, which leads us to our introduction of some of the New Deal agencies. And we're going to start with the FDIC, which stands for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This provided federal insurance for individual bank accounts up to $5,000 at the time, but today it's up to $250,000 or $250,000. So this means that the federal government insures up to a certain amount of money in each individual bank account. This isn't like stock. This wouldn't be like a 401k. This is specifically in like a savings account at the bank. If you deposit your money up to, that minimum is, or up to that maximum, I should say, is insured, meaning hypothetically, if the bank were to go under, the government would cover the loss. up to that amount. But consider the fact that with the money being insured by the federal government, the bank is so much less likely to go under because people are less likely to have this panicked mass withdrawal, knowing their money is protected. So it's almost kind of like a Jedi mind trick where they likely will not have to cover that loss because the problem would likely not occur again. Another agency we're going to quickly talk about that was created was the AAA, or the Agricultural Adjustment Act. This was a federal law passed in Roosevelt's first year, and the law offered farmers, it was specifically targeting farmers, which I think we could guess with agriculture, subsidies, which is like a monetary reward, in exchange for limiting their production of certain crops. Okay, so the subsidies are meant to essentially limit overproduction so that crop prices will stabilize and increase again. So it essentially, in layman's terms, you see the government providing a financial incentive to farmers if they were to farm less, aka like work less, which seems bizarre or counterproductive. But remember, the number one issue within the farming sector was overproduction. And so this allows the farmers to not produce as much, get the money they need in exchange, but then the price of their crops are naturally going to go up since they don't have as large of a supply per usual. Okay. And again, a subsidy is just kind of a financial incentive coming from the government. The other kind of like part of the first wave of the New Deal agency, which let me be clear, there's dozens. There's not just three. These are just three I'm talking about today. But there's a lot more than just this. But a third example is the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was a government agency also established in that first year of his presidency that aimed to control floods, improve navigation, improve living standards of farmers, and to also produce electrical power along the Tennessee River and its tributaries, kind of focusing on, most of Tennessee, portions of like rural Alabama, Mississippi, Kentucky, Georgia, that region, which is kind of where the Tennessee River lies. Essentially, with this project, you have to understand that you are trying to boost up and help provide aid, physical aid, industrial aid, really, to regions that are very hard hit by the Depression, but also know that all of these projects create a lot of jobs. So you're employing people simultaneously, okay? This is really trying to kind of boost up and modernizing the rural South, though. So that's kind of the beauty of many of these New Deal programs, is you're kind of trying to create something or to have a program that will provide some sort of benefit to the American people, some sort of aid, some sort of like outlet for them. In this case, again, like industrially modernizing, the Tennessee Valley region, but you're also creating jobs in the process of doing that improvement. And that is, these are programs that Americans look at Roosevelt and they say, yes, they are approving of his efforts. They like to see a president try to give them the relief that they need. But the reality is not every American is in favor of Roosevelt and his efforts. There is opposition that is met. And we're going to talk about this briefly. So let me just first say that you have both liberal and conservative critics of FDR. The several we're going to talk about are by name or more liberal, meaning they felt that FDR actually wasn't doing enough, like he could have gone above and beyond, like even more than he was, that some of the programs were not providing enough direct relief, and we'll talk specifically about who that is, and like why they might be trying to make a name for themselves, particularly the guy on the right. But let me just first say, students often wonder, where does FDR get the money like to do this stuff, to create all these jobs that cost money, all this engineering project that costs money? And the reality is the U.S. government is engaging in deficit spending throughout the New Deal process. I mean, it is spending and spending and spending, driving itself into debt, like to provide direct relief from the people. So your conservative critics who believe in a limited amount of government power being used in the economy are going to oppose the New Deal because of that deficit spending. Y'all looked at a source from Herbert Hoover, former president who lost to Roosevelt. He's obviously more of a conservative critic. But you also have critics like Coughlin and Huey Long, Father Coughlin and Huey Long, who think that the New Deal is not going far enough. And they are really appealing to like poor Americans, like the really, really, really downtrodden and suffering. So Father Coughlin, Charles Coughlin, was known to give these very impassionate radio sermons that combined religious ideals with economic and political ideals, which is not very, traditional always in a religious setting to like mix business and faith values, especially as a priest. But he, felt like there needed to be more direct. He was kind of almost radical with some of his ideas, like a guaranteed annual income of American citizens, the nationalization of banks, meaning they would no longer be privatized businesses, which goes kind of, again, against some capitalist values. Huey Long, of course, we know Huey Long, Louisiana senator. He was formerly the governor. He was, I know people don't always know this, but he was governor first and then he was senator. So at the time he was a senator, possibly aiming for a presidential, run for himself. So he was supportive of the New Deal initially, but then he proposed a nationwide program called Share Our Wealth, where he basically felt that there should be salary caps for like large American, like the wealthy class, and that the rest of that money should kind of be redistributed to the poorer citizens. And they feel like their programs and like even Coughlin's ideas thinks that his ideas would provide more direct relief to the American people. So I just want to be clear, not everyone loves the New Deal. He does have some, criticism, FDR, with his New Deal programs. The Supreme Court is also critical in their own way. We're going to see the Supreme Court rule some of FDR's New Deal agencies unconstitutional, including the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which we discussed. They said that agriculture was a local matter and should be regulated by the states rather than the federal government. He didn't feel like they didn't feel like that was a ideal, like method for the U.S. government to intervene in the farming sector so directly. And because of that, they felt it was unconstitutional. Well, that kind of started making FDR a little bit nervous that the court is going to overrule all of his New Deal legislation. So he eventually proposes a bill called the Court Packing Bill. It's very interesting, a very interesting target here. He basically said that, for every justice, for every Supreme Court justice who was over 70 years old and had served for at least 10 years, if they didn't retire, then that gave FDR the power to appoint up to like 6 more justices. So he's kind of like targeting the justices that are over the age of 70 because they're in large part the ones that are like countering him or challenging him in his intervention of the court. He wants to appoint people that he felt were more supportive of his legislation. Many people would think this is unconstitutional, but let's just a quick reminder that the judicial branch is established in the U.S. Constitution, but not the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was created with a law passed during President George Washington's administration. So in theory, a law could be passed to make changes like to the way the court is set up like internally. With that being said, the bill got overruled, so it doesn't pass. It doesn't go anywhere. It's a dead bill. His court packing bill is not going to happen. It gets voted out. And I think one of the justices that was causing him some trouble or was eventually like going to retire. And so the justices don't continue to like overrule every single one of the New Deal agencies. Roosevelt's worst fears are not confirmed, but they do rule several of them as unconstitutional. Okay, last notes for today. I know we've talked a lot here. So Roosevelt is re-elected in 1936. That was his re-election year, his first re-election. Because, he'll be re-elected 4 times in total, which we'll get to in the next chapter. But the New Deal really didn't make this overwhelming difference. Like, if we look at actual numbers, the economy is not suddenly revived in Roosevelt's first term. It's not like a grand slam perfect solution. But Americans put their faith in FDR, feeling like he's on the right track. They will reelect him in 36. And that kind of shows you that even though they didn't reelect Hoover, that's because it's not just because he didn't solve the problem, but they didn't trust his efforts. And they trust FDR's efforts, which is why they're going to reelect him. FDR will promise more effort and more relief. And so he passes, kind of this wave of like a second New Deal with the second 100 days, where all this other legislation coming out to kind of help, provide direct relief and revive the economy. So one example of what would be considered like the second New Deal, meaning something passed in his second term, would be the Social Security Act or Social Security Administration, which established a system to provide old age pensions for workers. So if you were in retirement age, you shouldn't have to continue working. So it's kind of a government pension. It still exists today as that, but it's not necessarily enough to live off of. But it does help substantially. The SSA, though, also provides benefits for victims of like work-related industrial accidents, unemployment insurance, aid for mothers and children, and the mothers of children that are like physically disabled. If someone in your family is, needing like lifelong care, then Social Security can help pay for some of their medical costs. So it does help millions of Americans to feel more secure, though you realize that it doesn't really help the agricultural sector so much. More so focuses on like, business workers. But millions are affected. Even a larger agency, though, it has to be the WPA, which stands for the Works Progress Administration. This is FDR's largest New Deal agency. It provides work for over 8 million Americans through construction jobs, through art commissions, which we kind of saw with the posters, building bridges, building dams, airfields, hospitals, schools, buildings of importance that would help society in some way. LSU, and we're going to kind of talk about this on Monday, but LSU has several buildings and areas around campus. That's this picture on the left that are constructed as part of the Works Progress Administration, the Ag Center, some of the classrooms in the quad. The lakes, if you're familiar with the LSU lakes, those are obviously not natural lakes. They are man-made lakes, and in part they are financed through the WPA. So again, how does that help? It creates jobs. In the Louisiana State Capitol, in the building, there are these beautiful murals all along the wall. Those are art projects that were commissioned per the WPA. And so I would say the WPA affects the widest range of Americans in terms of creating job opportunity and providing relief. There's more than just these agencies created as a second New Deal. These are just 2 we're talking about right now. And the last note I just wanted to go over really quickly, I should have had her picture on here, but Eleanor Roosevelt is the First Lady, and she is a huge help to FDR. She's a very active First Lady, a social reformer, humanitarian, encouraged him to do more, traveled the country with him, observed social conditions, like observed the things that the people were suffering with, and kind of is almost like a liaison to him in that way. We see the role of First Lady kind of changing because of the efforts of Eleanor Roosevelt. Okay, please write down any questions you have. I know this is long. We will kind of debrief some things on Monday. I hope you have a good rest of your weekend.